Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to remind you we broadcast every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 7 to 8 in the morning here through Grupo Imagen. And we're going to start also doing more podcasts with many of these interviews because, as you know, we're all trying to understand the transition process that is taking place as we speak. It's been 2 weeks since Claudia Sheinbaum was elected president of Mexico. And what has been fascinating about this whole process is that I guess, and I don't even know how to describe this feeling or this analysis, is that we're all trying to understand who Claudia Sheinbaum is and what kind of president is she going to be, and how, if and will she step away from some of the policies that is being supported by current president Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador. Will she be able to? And some of the decisions or the comments that she made this week would seem to indicate that it's not going to be an easy task, even though some of these decisions that are being made by the president in his last 3 months in power may have an extraordinary impact on her administration, and I would say even the future of Mexico. Joining us once again, and I always appreciate when he joins us, is Gabriel Casillas. He's a chief economist chief economist for Latin America at Barclays Bank. I'm so happy you're joining us because the big question mark right now is beyond Claudia Sheinbaum's ability to make decisions that may or may not go against President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador's vision of the future of Mexico's democracy. What we've seen this week that has been very surprising is an important reaction by the markets, by investors. The Mexican peso has devaluated in the last 3 weeks, the weeks before the election, and as we are doing this interview, has devaluated almost 10%. And of course, that has created a lot of nervousness simply because it's devaluating. Everybody hates to see those spikes or those important devaluations. But more importantly, I think there's a certain level of surprise even by President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, who keeps on justifying, saying it's not that important, don't pay attention to it. Devaluations happen after every elections, and I think he's right. But there is this sense that these decisions that he's proposing, this reform to the judicial system that he says will be debated in September, where judges will be elected, among other reforms in this packet, there's a sense that there is a certain level of nervousness from abroad regarding these reforms. So once again, Gabriel, welcome to the show. Just why don't you put into context how you think these decisions that are being made as we speak is being perceived from the markets, from investors?
Yeah, great. It's great to see you, Ana Maria, and thanks for inviting me to your program. So, and of course, happy to talk to your audience. So, real quick, I mean, 3 important parts here about what you're saying. Number one, market participants are concerned mainly because of the reforms that could be approved, because now Morena, the ruling party, has the 2/3 constitutional majority. That's the main concern.
Can I stop you there? Can I stop you there then?
Yes, of course.
Not necessarily only these reforms that are being presented by the president, where judges, for example, will be elected, what would be discussed in September. It's just this general concern that they have what they call the supermajority, mayoría calificada, that will facilitate any constitutional reform that could be proposed by Andrés Manuel during his last weeks and by the president, but the new president, Claudia Sheinbaum. So that's the concern, not necessarily the reforms that are linked to the judicial branch?
No, the main concern is with the judicial reform. But I mean, let me say, so as I was saying, divided in three. So the first one is, in general, the majorities. No, that's why the markets reacted badly to the outcome of the election, because the markets were expecting Claudia to win, and they were expecting Morena to win with like simple majorities of 50% plus one. But nobody was expecting like the 2/3. So that's the first part. No, then we saw, this short press conference by Minister of Finance Rogelio Ramírez de la O, that Claudia already mentioned before, that he would stay in her administration, and that was important for markets, because that gives her credibility that on the fiscal side there will be no slippage there. So in this context, afterwards, after this short press conference by Minister Rogelio Ramírez de la O, actually markets calmed down. You see that directly in dollar mex and in other assets. So the big problem, and this is part number 3, was the morning press conference by President Lopez Obrador, when he not only said that he will pursue the judiciary reform, but he said that he knew it was the most market sensitive reform, and that he couldn't care less. He even said that justice was above markets. No, so of course that was like the airport moment for all market participants. And I'm saying the airport moment because it was something that nobody was expecting. Saying, okay, he's going to have the 2/3 majority, but he wants to finish his term in good terms with markets. President Lopez Obrador has always said that he wants to be remembered as the best president Mexico has ever had, and that the president that for the first time in a long time, we didn't see a peso depreciation or peso devaluation. So everybody thought, well, this reform, it's really, really market sensitive. He's not going to do it. He already is... He has already done most of the things he wanted. On top of this, a lot of people, including myself, thought, incentives to do the judiciary reform are no longer here. If you already have the 2/3, if you really want to protect your legacy, it's better to keep the judiciary power, the Supreme Court, as it is. Because if now you're going to change it with the reform, that instead of having a decision-making process based upon legal questions or legal issues, that decision-making process is going to be political now. So if we have Morena wave, no? So if we have elections for the judiciary, everybody's going to be for Morena, no? But then maybe this wave changes in the future, and then you're going to have the next political big thing is going to have the Supreme Court as well. So if you want to protect your legacy, it's better to keep it as it is. But
because you have a better control of how at least the justices are going to be chosen, which is a process by which the president chooses his justice, literally chooses his justices with approval of both of the chamber, but of the Senate. But if you control most of the Senate, you're going to get your justices, right?
Yeah, but two problems here. Problem number 1 is that now it's not only that you will have them publicly elected. So instead of having like the most prepared justice, now you will have the one that is more popular, not necessarily the best prepared. No, so that's number 1, and it's gonna be more on the political side rather on the qualifications. No, as trying to defend the Constitution and knowing law deeply. No, that's problem number 1. But problem number 2, it is twofold. No, one is rating agencies. When they rate the country's debt, repayment probability, they take into account the institutional framework of the country. And if you weaken your institutions, then you can have a rating downgrade. That's number 1, and that's what investors care about. They do not care much about the justice system in Mexico. They care if the rating agencies downgrade Mexico. And number 2, it's about nearshoring. The ability of Mexico being able to fully take advantage of all these companies coming to Mexico. And right now, companies know that at some point, if the government goes against them, and if they are operating within the limits of the law, that that the judiciary power is going to be with them. Just take the example for the companies that invested in green and renewables in the past administration. This government went against them, and they were able to file an injunction with local courts, and they were defended, because they were affected by changes in the law. So now, if companies don't know that or know that they're no longer going to have the judiciary power, protecting them, so it's another obstacle to invest in Mexico. Instead of getting rid of the obstacles, now we're adding an additional one. And I know nearshoring is a trend so powerful that it's going to come. But we will never know the companies that decided not to come, the counterfactual, because of these issues. No, so definitely these are the problems that that market participants see. So they do not. Honestly, they are very optimistic about Claudia. They see Claudia Sheinbaum as an AMLO 2.0 with a pickup. So fiscal responsible, respectful of central bank autonomy. But on top of this, they see important improvements in 3 areas. Area number 1, security. No longer hogs, not bullets, but hardliner. Number 2, they see Claudia as more open to investment in the private sector. If you want to pursue the energy transition and green and renewables, you will have to have the private sector there. And number 3, in terms of the decision-making process of Claudia will be based more upon cost-benefit analysis rather than occurrences and gut feeling. No, so that's how market participants perceive Claudia. All the investors that visited Mexico and have had talks with Claudia's team before the election, they are quite comfortable. I don't want to say complacent. They were quite comfortable. So the problem right now is just waiting to have just AMLO in September having the 2/3 majority. That's the thing.
So I guess the question is, as I listen to you lay it out, and it's very interesting, because this initial reaction has to do with this judicial reform, which may or may not pass in September. But assuming that it is presented, which everything seems to be to indicate that Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador will present some type of bill, whether the Claudia Sheinbaum, president-elect or not, wants it or not, understanding the implications on her future administration. What would be? I mean, we're all going to have to watch the September 1st deadline, but and when the new Congress is sworn in, what would be the impact? The immediate impact to the fact that there is a proposal being discussed?
I mean, as you know, market participants usually act well before something happens. No? So probably, the impact is going to is taking place right now as we speak, and probably in the next few weeks or months. It's going to be a long summer. It's going to be cruel summer, like Bananarama song from the 80s. No?
Yeah.
So we're going to have a lot of volatility, unfortunately. We don't see positive catalysts. For example, Claudia Sheinbaum is going to announce her cabinet. But honestly, market participants only care about the Minister of Finance. The other ministers are important, of course, for the country or for many things. But for markets, it's about the Minister of Finance, and they already know it's Rogelio Ramirez de la O team. So that probably is not going to be a positive catalyst. And a good positive catalyst will be the president backing off from trying to approve the judicial reform. But we don't see that happening either. So we're going to have volatile summer, and then probably September might get worse, not only because of the approval of this reform, potential approval, but also because we're going to have, candidate Trump in full-fledged campaign for the U.S. election, probably using Mexico as a piñata. No, so in this context, it's going to be tough. So definitely a positive catalyst, I think, will start once Claudia Sheinbaum takes up office, is sworn in. I think that's going to be the first thing that market participants are going to take as a positive catalyst, because even if it's approved, they're gonna take a close look to the implementation of that reform. I mean, we know several reforms in Mexico have been approved, and we have seen no implementation whatsoever. Remember the financial reform by Peña Nieto?
Right.
It was approved in 2013. Actually, I was very optimistic about this reform, but they had to create specialized courts for banking cases. This never happened. So reforms, you can always add sand to the wheels and make the implementation very slow. So that's another thing that not only market participants in general are going to take a close look at, but also rating agencies. No, I mean I don't think they are like in a rush to change the rating of Mexico, but definitely they not only want to see what reform is presented, although we know already, or what reform is going to be approved. They also want to know how the implementation is going to take place, and this is important as well.
Joining us today is Gabriel Casilla. You know him well. He's been joining us throughout the years. He's the chief economist for Latin America at Barclays. Gabriel, spent the last couple of days just kind of going back to some transitions that took place at different moments. And one of the transitions that I've been following very closely, just to see what we can learn from that transition, of course, was the transition between President Carlos Salinas de Gortari to President-elect Ernesto Zedillo, where just literally the day he was taken office, the country was already in a crisis, and it's called El Error de Diciembre. And the reasons why there was a catalyst, or that happened, are very different than the reasons or the decisions that are being made right now. But what I thought was fascinating at this stage was kind of this blaming game as to who was going to assume the responsibility of a devaluation at that time, which was, I believe, 15% during that transition, which had an enormous impact on the investors' confidence. And there was the run on the peso. I mean, literally, people were taking money out of the country and sending it to the United States, mostly turning it into dollars, which had an enormous impact on the Mexican peso, enormous devaluation. But more importantly, the reserves, international reserves, were depleted, and that's. It came to a point, and this is maybe we could talk about this in historical terms, where the U.S. government had to come in and support the Mexican peso, despite the fact that the U.S. Congress did not want to approve this packet. Clinton figured out a way to be able to loan money to President Cedillo so that they basically would pay the bills. My question is, beyond the reasons why the tequilazo took place during this transition between Cedillo and Salinas, what factors could lead to a similar situation where there would be a run on the peso, people would lose confidence in keeping their money in Mexico, and we would have a different type of crisis, but it would result in a major devaluation due to lack of confidence in Mexico? I mean, do you envision, and this is, I hate even asking the question, but is there any possibility of that happening? And we had the Bank of Mexico coming in and said, don't worry, we will back the Mexican peso so that there's, so we don't have this type of devaluation. I mean, clearly the Bank of Mexico is now on this. So why wouldn't we have a run on the Mexican peso?
I mean, this is a very good question. You shouldn't be ashamed of asking it. I mean, a lot of people is asking the very same question today in Mexico, and definitely it's a very important one. But let me tell you, I think the fundamentals do not support the idea that we will have a crisis. Not even 10% of the crisis we had back then. So let me tell you I'm going to go quickly because there are 6 reasons, but I think the 6 reasons are very important. I'm going to go really quickly. So number one, back in '94, we had a deep political crisis in Mexico with the assassination of the presidential candidate, and you know all the story. So
right.
we're not there. No, so that's point number one. Point number two, we had a fixed exchange rate system, right. In which the central bank controlled the currency, and also reserves were very low. We had like $6 billion at the end of December '94. So right now we have a flexible exchange rate regime that has worked perfectly. The Mexican peso is one of the top 3 most traded emerging currencies in the world, and we have an autonomous central bank. So that's definitely a whole different thing compared to what we were. Number 3, we had a balance of payment. We had a balance of payment problem back then. I mean, we had a deficit of more than 7% of GDP or in the current account. Now we have actually a 0.3% deficit. That's how we closed last year, and of course, the magnitude of trade between Mexico and the U.S. and in general, it has no comparison at all. And we were basically oil-based trading. Now oil is very it has a very low share of exports or imports right now, compared to that time. So no balance of payment problem. That was the major problem as well. So number 4, wealth families in Mexico and companies have already put their money away. I mean, since AMLO won the election, and then with the cancellation of the country, of the export of the airport of Mexico City, everybody took their money out. Take a look at several banks foreign banks that were in Mexico had their private banking area in Mexico. They took it out because no longer the families wanted to preserve their wealth in Mexico. So that money is out since then, and it has not come back. No, even other less wealthy families in Mexico that wanted to have their money in dollars in their mutual funds, in their banks, in their retail banks, they were able to put their money in mutual funds that are indexed to the dollar. So I don't think there is a lot of money to take out from like wealth families. I mean, the things that have really moved the Mexican peso in the past few years have been foreign investment, has been company related flows, trade, but definitely wealth family money has been out of Mexico for years. Actually, they have been losing a lot of money in some cases because they went out at 21, 22, 23, 25 pesos per dollar, and they have been losing money in those terms. No. Number 5, the Fed. The Fed, remember back in '94, they started hiking rates, and that was like the drop of the, as we say in Mexico, la gota que derramó el vaso.
Right.
So that was like the thing.
That broke the camel's back.
Exactly. That's the one. That's the one I was looking for, and I didn't find it in my mind. So definitely, the Fed's right now not hiking rates. On the contrary, it probably is going to start lowering rates. So that makes a whole different scenario as well. And number 6, finally, very important, banks. I mean, remember back in '94, '95, 18 out of 19 banks went bankrupt. No, surveillance and regulation in Mexico was very loose. We were in the times of auto-regulation from Reaganomics. Right now, remember, Mexico was the first country to be Basel III compliant in the world, and regulation is very restrictive, and banks are super well capitalized, so definitely, and they're well supervised. It's not like in the '90s, where the owner of a bank was making auto loans to himself or to their family members. So those kind of things don't happen anymore. So the 51 banks that are in Mexico are well capitalized, and so imagine these 6 reasons. I think will make you think definitely we're not in '94. Probably we'll see volatility in the exchange rate. We're probably going to see at some point maybe a more depreciated currency. It's highly likely because the downside risks of what's happening with these reforms are higher than the upside risks. But outside of that, definitely far away from '94. But I'm glad you asked the question because I have this question all over the place these days.
Well, it's because I'm looking at it from kind of like the political, there was political decisions that were made. And of course, there was a situation in the U.S. that was actually very favorable for the U.S. to step in and support Mexico, which if for whatever reason Mexico required support for whatever reason from the U.S., I think as the electoral process moves forward, it's going to be less likely that the U.S. can step in and support Mexico if there was a need to, even with political support, simply because the United States is in the middle of elections. But does this investments in Mexico somehow affect stock markets in the United States, pension plans in the United States, or could this have a contagion to other parts of Latin America? There was some analysts kind of concerned that what is happening with the Mexican peso and the volatility may be a reflection of something else going on in volatility in other exchanges, particularly in Latin America.
Well, there's always, whenever you have an FOMC decision or you have the CPI in the US, markets are very sensitive to these issues, and of course we have seen some volatility coming out of that. That moves all currencies in the world, not only the peso.
Not only Latin America.
Exactly. But in Latin America, the problem is that we have seen a lot of political noise. It's not only Mexico, no? I mean, right. Lula in Brazil is actually, unfortunately deteriorating the fiscal outlook, and he has been actually, attacking the central bank. The Central Bank of Brazil, that it became independent just a few years ago. It's not like Banco de Mexico since '94, but in the case of Brazil, it's recently became independent, and the president has been trying to force the central bank to lower rates at a faster pace. So the central bank has started to even lose some credibility. So there's noise coming out of Brazil. If you move to Colombia, there's a lot of noise with the fiscal situation and with the reforms that President Petro wanted to approve. If you move to Peru, they have been doing terribly in terms of economic activity. Yeah, so and in Argentina, even though President Milei had this, triumph with the approval of his omnibus bill in the Senate, the problem is that there are things that he has not been able to do. So right now, all the good things that has happened, like on the fiscal front and on inflation, are non-sustainable. If you don't take out the subsidies, and if you don't do like the adjustment that Argentina needs, then these things that he has been doing are not sustainable. So I can continue with more Latin American countries.
Right. No, because
it's political noise all over the place.
because which would make Mexico a very interesting place to invest, because it's like it was an oasis in this huge chaos in the Americas. And I think in one interview you told me that despite questions there may be on Mexican democracy or comments made by Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, there was political stability and stability in general that made Mexico very attractive. So I guess the question is, and I really appreciate you joining us, is at what point were the rating companies going to lose patience? And I ask you this because there's this big, huge elephant in the room that we really have not conversed about in the last couple of weeks since the election, that has to do with the future of Pemex. I mean, everybody assumes that something dramatic has to change with Pemex because it's just going to drag down the entire economy, or it sounds like it, the way it's being described. She has the new president, Dr. Sheinbaum, has said that she didn't say that she was going to reform Pemex, but at least Ramirez de la O kind of made allusions that there would be better coordination between the Ministry of Finance and Pemex. And everybody kind of interpreted that, finally, the Ministry of Finance is going to step in and put some order in terms of the amount of money that Pemex is going to require in its debt. But it seems that at one point, this reform is not going to happen very fast. And whatever they're planning to do, if they do anything, if there is any major changes. And two, the rating companies at one point are going to have to make a decision. And it seems like they're being pressured to make a decision on Pemex sooner than later.
Yeah, no, definitely. Pemex is a big elephant in the room for rating agencies and for fiscal thing and for fiscal outlook in Mexico. So far, rating agencies are patient. I think they know that the government is going to be fully supportive of Pemex. And at some point, they want to see like a more holistic plan to tackle situation in Pemex. Now, honestly, Pemex is an easy fix because they have been doing much better on the exploration and extraction of oil. Right now, oil production, if you add condensates, that it's the very high quality oil that they have been able to extract lately, you're very close to 2 million barrels per day. So, I mean, they have not been able to really, show off or brag about this, but they have been doing it. But the real problem is downstream. The losses of Pemex are downstream. So, and also because it's heavily indebted. And the heavily indebted issue is not because of Lopez Obrador administration; it was the previous administration. So I think the Claudia Sheinbaum team is really thinking of how to tackle Pemex in a more holistic way, and this means reducing the debt. It means reducing losses, and it means also aligning the incentives between Hacienda and Pemex. Because the problem is that, for example, the president tells right now, President Lopez Obrador tells the CEO of Pemex, Octavio Romero, I need you to maximize production of oil and maximize refining. So he goes with the mandate, and he has done greatly, honestly. The problem is that we know that maximizing production is not maximizing profit. It's like a microeconomics 101 class, no? So the problem is that Hacienda wants maximizing profit in order to give them money to the government, no? So these incentives that are misaligned also play an important role. So these are the three things that I believe Claudia Sheinbaum team are very aware, and if they are able to do that, they're going to tackle the Pemex situation more realistically, and it's not going to be a fix of two quarters or 1 year. Probably it's going to take the whole administration to fix it. But I think that there are ways to do it, and I think now there's a sense of urgency to do it. no?
Mhm.
And that's important.
Because, when you kind of look at what's happening, I mean, every time I think of a devaluation, I think of here in Mexico, I think about the prices, certain prices go up, inflation could go up, and people start taking their money, even if it's, just middle class, whatever's left of the middle class, everybody starts trying to take their money out. I mean, it kind of creates this contagion even among here in Mexico, where you stop trusting the government or the way government makes decisions. Now, Claudia Sheinbaum has an enormous advantage that she is probably the most powerful president, could be the most powerful president Mexico has ever had, simply because of the number of people who voted for her, the political support she has, and she literally controls both chambers. And if things stay where they are, she's going to control the Supreme Court, because she will be able to select a Supreme Court justice in November. That's going to be one of her most interesting decisions, and that she will have more justices who look favorably at La Cuarta Transformación than those who don't. So the issue here is, at what point some of these decisions that are being made, either pressured by Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or simply because she maybe doesn't believe in the markets in the same way we think she may be, because we assume that she and her team would not like to see a devaluation, would like to have a good relationship with investors, but there may be forces or political forces that she can't control. At what should we be watching for in the next couple of months? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, I think the most important thing is, the budget. That's number one. And we know usually the deadline to submit the budget to Congress is September 8th, but now because of elections is November 15th. So the sooner the government sends or submits the budget proposal to the government, to Congress, I think that's one of the things, the key aspects. If there's going to be a fiscal consolidation from the 5.9% deficit for this year, I mean, everybody's waiting for some consolidation.
But it doesn't look like that's going to, I mean, it almost seems impossible for that to happen. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, think about it.
I mean, I mean, remember Milton Friedman's, this Nobel laureate, famous phrase that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, no? So right. I know that, but there are a lot of one-offs for this year that could be, just, if you remove them next year, you can go not easily, but you can go easily to 4% and not so easily to 3% deficit. Mm-hmm. But for example, 1 full percentage point is AMLO's infrastructure projects. So, if you're not going to be building the Dos Bocas refinery or the IFA airport, those things, then you get rid of 1%. Then you have like 0.5% coming out of non-recurrent things like, the presidential elections or the economic census that INEGI has to conduct every 5 years and are expensive. Then you have around 0.3 percentage points coming out of the underspending of 23 that were transferred to 24. And you have 0.8%, a lot, of GDP from the Pemex budget line. So you can get to 3.5 kind of easy. Now, the thing is, do you want to keep the Pemex budget line or not? Maybe Pemex needs money. Theoretically, they don't need, because with the government with the money that the government gave them this year, they're able to pay for the bond maturities this year and next year. But maybe they're burning cash at a fast pace because of refining, so maybe they need some money. So they can do consolidation to 4%, not necessarily to 3%, and I think markets will welcome that, and rating agencies. That's quite achievable. So it's just the willingness to do it. So that's number one. Number two, a Pemex plan. A Pemex holistic plan is the other thing that they are willing to do that. And number three, out of how many reforms are able to be approved out of these 20 that now they're no longer 20, because, Claudia added some reforms to it, like there are 23 according to my count.
More pensions, more money. They're going to need more money, clearly, for these extra.
But there's the space. There's a space. I think it's not a short-term problem. No, it's more like a medium-term thing. And if they are able to improve fiscal efficiency in terms of tax collection and maybe tax reform even at the state level with the property tax, with the predial. I mean, there are things that the administration could do to get out of it. So markets are not very, very concerned, honestly. But definitely they're going to focus on these reforms, they're going to focus on the budget proposal, and they're going to focus on a Pemex plan. Those are the three things markets are looking at, and definitely are going to be paying attention very closely.
And what about USMCA? Well, they have to start negotiating USMCA in 2026. I mean, there's time. And it's hard to even figure out how to even think about some of these things, because we have to figure out who's going to be the next president of the United States, which could definitely define a lot of these things that you and I are discussing. So as we're approaching October 1st, and we're kind of looking towards the future, any major decisions that could be made that would affect the perception and the confidence that that investors have in Mexico, that would create much more nervousness, and that we would have the rating companies having to say something, or having at least to issue some types of warnings that could affect investments in Mexico and pension programs in the United States and all that other stuff. I mean, is there anything that could be said beyond this reform that could make everybody very, very nervous?
Yeah, well, they're going to be, I mean, whatever candidate Trump is going to say a bunch of things. He will say that probably the review in the sunset clause that he imposed in the USMCA, he probably is going to impose tariffs if the Mexican government doesn't help him with immigration or with fentanyl imports. I mean, the nervousness, I think, is going to come more from political headline risk rather than from other sort of risk, no? So it's more like that, because, incentives between Mexico and the US are aligned. They were aligned a few years ago. Now it's even clearer with nearshoring. So it's going to be more the political headline risk rather than really something fundamental.
Gabriel Casillas, it is always great to have you on the show. Very clear. I mean, I always get very anxious when there's transitions like this, and it's just so good to hear your explanations. And of course, it's just a matter of literally watching hour by hour, watching statements that are being made in the next 2 or 3 months to figure out some aspects of how Claudia Sheinbaum may do, not only do this transition, but also, what type of president she wants to be. Is she going to be her own person, her own woman, or she will lag with and have to carry some of these ideas that Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador has been proposing, and that of course creates a lot of nervousness for the markets. I really appreciate you joining us.
No, on the contrary, thanks very much for the invitation. Always glad to talk to you. And